Welcome back, everyone. Now we have Ewan and Paola. They're gonna shed some lights on this project, Missing Migrants project they worked, and what were the challenges and where they see it forward. And we're gonna also, at the end, would like to have your ideas and share your thoughts, that because the Missing Migrants project is going in the second phase, and it will be good to share your thoughts to us. If you could do that, it would be great. Please.
So Paola, what was the process like working with IOM as a technical person?
Well, we want to share with you how was the experience from the personal perspective, and then we continue. So this was really interesting because it was a short-term project, so it was around 3 to 6 months, just the time to work on this. But there were different stages of the project. So we started, for example, with some interviews. The team, as she said, is not just in Berlin, it's also all around the globe. So there is someone in Middle East, there is someone in Africa, in Asia, and I had the opportunity to have these interviews with each one of them, which was very nice because I got an understanding of how they work, like this distributed work, how it works, then how it is aggregated, how it is validated, but also I could get the perspective of each person. So for example, there was one person that was working in the Middle East, and she was telling us the problem, the challenge that is to make a keyword search when she has a keyword search in one language, and then she retrieved the results in other language, right? So this is easy for us if we think about die, right, in English, and then D in German, and then how that messes everything. So that's some of the things of the highlights that you can get when you have these one-to-one interviews. So that was like the first part. That was very nice to share and to learn, like which was the workflows and the roles. Then was the list of requirements, so we know more or less what we wanted, right? We wanted a tool that let us retrieve first this relevant content, but which specific features we wanted. How do we want it to interact with this platform, taking into account the competence. So just to go to those places and kind of study them was the second phase, and design something according to that, of how it should be, how it should function. So that was a second stage that was also very interesting. What Andrea was telling us was that precisely one of the requirements that were done was, okay, please just don't put the images in the results, right? To make our objective of registering the count of deaths and missing migrants through the immigration routes, we need to see the news articles to get the context. But we, as analysts, don't need to see those images again and again and again, every day, all of the days. So these were the type of decisions that we took in the design for the tool. Then maybe some of you that were before in the presentation, I told you, okay, we had the relevant data set, then we have to tag like some irrelevant data set so that we could classify, and then to make the distribution similar to the real distribution, I take a sample from there. So that was also very interesting because we could see the temporal distribution, the geographical distribution, and then the whole. So this was the work with the analyst from the AMMP team, Missing Migrant Projects team. Then also the collaboration with Navid, that is a researcher from NLP and JKU, and he giving us kind of this more insight, like, okay, just don't tackle this problem as a classification problem. Tackle it as an information retrieval problem. Now don't use deep learning, but use existing infrastructure, like Elasticsearch, and just fine-tune the parameters. All of those ideas were very interesting, and that was a nice, I think of being with an organization like data-friendly space, that it's kind of small, but it still have their context in the research sector and, with the humanitarian sector. So, just like this perspective that to work in the humanitarian sector, like in this type of projects, is very rewarding, because each time you can see the purpose that you have, and it's possible to explore a different skills that you have and that you can research on. So maybe if you are passionate just about a topic, you get also the opportunity to explore other areas and inform yourself more. So yeah, I think that was very nice from the experience, and thank you really for the opportunity to work with the team. Was very nice, and I really encourage those persons. I don't know if there are internships or consultancies, but it will be super nice if you have new ideas and you're excited about this type of work, because it's really rewarding. Yeah, and there is a lot of space to improve and to generate new ideas of how, to improve that recall metric and more. And for you, as a data-friendly space, like organization, how was the work?
I'm so sorry. I am so sorry.
Oh.
We have a troubleshooter there.
His name is Safar. Perhaps we can all give him a round of applause. So yeah, back to the talk. I work for an organization called Data Friendly Space, and we're a nonprofit that does data and IT work for humanitarian organizations. We work with large agencies like IOM and then also smaller NGOs as well. And this project was really interesting for us to take on from the start. Natural language processing is something that is of great interest to me, and we work on it quite a bit as an organization. So, as anyone here may have been a consultant before or has worked for consultancy-like roles, starting a new project is always quite interesting, and for us, one of the main focuses is thinking about what resources we already have presently or have used before that can be used to save duplication of effort. So we work on a lot of open source projects, and we use open source projects. So wherever we can bring in existing work we've done on NLP or infrastructure and reuse it, that's very helpful. That could be both from code bases, but also from individuals who have the similar experience. A couple of challenges that we faced, a large one was around deploying on the IOM infrastructure. We had a real back and forth in terms of providing specifications for what was going to be an AWS deployment, and there are a lot of procedures to follow. And I think it's very understandable that an organization like IOM would be hesitant about some digital technologies given the confidential data that they have. But it was a really long back and forth, and it delayed the project by about 8 months or a year, simply because there's this one 50-page Google sheet, and we couldn't seem to quite come to an agreement about what kind of firewall technology we had to use, et cetera, et cetera. So these seem like trivial things, but they really do have impact. And it cost the IOM team a lot of time and also money. And then same for us. It makes it really hard to plan resources when you think, okay, we're going to start now, but you're actually going to start almost a year later. So that's always quite a challenge. And then lastly, we, as an organization, we of course want to communicate the work that we've done, both for allowing the same methods to be used by other organizations, and also just to show as an organization what kind of projects we do. But there's really a fine line, I find, in humanitarian communications where you don't want to use this atrocious suffering of people dying in migration as to boost your organization or to boost, to showcase what you've done. But at the same time, you do want it to be known what's being done. So it's kind of a challenge for how you can respectfully promote what you've done without kind of going over the line. So I think those were my main reflections for that one.
Would you like to highlight something on the ethical implications of gathering data and processing this data and making reports? What are the ethical implications around it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially when it's considering those vulnerable people, or those who are considered vulnerable.
One thing that's come up quite a bit in conversation is that working with this kind of information, it's easy to get lost in the fact that there's real people behind the numbers and there's real human suffering. I think I come from a development background too, like IT development, and so when you're sitting behind a screen all day just pounding through code and just being pretty far removed from the actual incidents, you can almost kind of forget. And these descriptions of how people die in migration are obviously very horrible, and so it just kind of I think the human instinct is just to kind of like numb yourself in some ways to it and just normalize it. So I think ethically speaking, it's important to remember kind of the actual substance of what's going into this data. And then, as we talked about as well, bias in the data is a big one, especially for underreporting or potentially overreporting. Excuse me. It's always interesting for me to see how some events can receive huge media coverage while others don't. And I think the art of doing media monitoring like this is inherently quite imperfect, but we're doing the best that we can to cover it. And I think an unfortunate reality is that you're never going to get a perfect solution. And I think this is what I see a lot in the humanitarian community, which is there's a lot of efforts to get the best that you can get, but really at the end of the day, it's you're going to kind of come up with a best estimate. And there's a lot of ethical implications there in terms of what this says about the data. As Andre was saying, with the example of deaths in sub-Saharan Africa versus the Mediterranean, if this data is released, then it's going to look like the Mediterranean is a much bigger issue than sub-Saharan Africa. And then the ethical repercussion there would be, more aid could go to that region to where it's actually needed. I think the best metaphor that I have for this is if you think about, it's kind of a weird one, but it'll make sense. If you think about people that do sports analytics, right? And let's pick, I'll call it soccer because I live in the US, but most people here it's probably football. If you're looking at sports analytics and you're looking at soccer, right? You have a very fixed view. You have a match and you have players, you have goals, passes, et cetera, et cetera. And it's all quite clearly defined and it's all quite clearly collected. So the universe of what you know about soccer matches is pretty well defined. Now, if you look at something like a humanitarian crisis, it's really like, to a very large degree, way more complex and way more unknown. In a lot of countries where people originate or go to for migration, there hasn't been a census in decades, or maybe there never has been one. So the kind of like frame of this whole endeavor that you're working in is so much more porous and so much more unclearly defined than what you would have in other industries and other sectors. So to loop that back, just the idea that you're really kind of doing a best effort that you can do, but I mean, there's probably no way to really get to 100%, and that's something to keep in mind as well.
You run a non-profit tech organization, and how do you think like private sector can come in and contribute to the humanitarian and development sector with the tools and resources they have?
Yeah, it's a great question. And my background is also in the private sector. So I've been able to kind of see it on both sides. I think that private sector can have very valuable contributions to the development and humanitarian communities. I think that a lot of open source libraries that we use have active contributions from private sector organizations. They may be the maintainers or they just contribute to them. So I think that alone is quite a valuable contribution. I think on the flip side, things like hackathons or partnerships can be very useful, but I think there's a bit of a pitfall where a lot of good effort can come from external organizations, but that doesn't mean that it necessarily gets used by the humanitarian organizations. So this first step occurs, but then it really takes an organization to foster what's been given to them and then actually implement it. I think there's a lot of reasons why that doesn't happen. Part of it is it's all good and well to have a code base that does something, but then you need to implement it, both from a technical standpoint, but then also an organization needs to adopt it into its decision-making and its thought process. This would go down into the realm of quote-unquote data-driven organizations. And sometimes it's hard for organizations that are as old as UN agencies or IOM to do this. IOM was founded in the early 1950s. And so you have an organization that's about 70 years old. And when it started, I don't know what the 1950s technology was. I assume it's something, punch cards, were they around in the 1950s? I don't know. Punch cards-ish. And so you've got punch cards, and now you've got like scalable cloud computing and SageMaker and BERT and all this stuff. And so it's totally night and day difference. And the way that data can be used is also totally different. So it's not as if this is a startup, founded in 2015 that can really build itself around the new type of data that we have, but rather it's quite a legacy organization that still has a lot of potential to use this data, but it just takes a lot of time to retool and recalibrate an organization like that.
Yeah, those were really excellent points, and I would like to add to that from my perspective. Now I am working as information management and data science officer at the Federation of the Red Cross, so the Red Cross movement, and there we have exactly that. We are a giant organization, and we have a lot of potential because in the Red Cross movement we attend to emergencies, to disasters, and because of the nature of funding and how we work, we are used to report a lot of what happens, right? So there is a disaster, okay, we report what have happened. We have location information, we have indicators that are very relevant within that narrative. So the potential of extracting that and learning from all these type of hazards in similar locations, it's there, right? But how can we actually explode, kind of really go and dive into that information? So what we have done until now by one part is precisely to have consultancies with companies like yours that are data driven, that can support in that. But as you say, okay, it is great if there is a specific deliverable because you are going to be there supporting, and then that knowledge is out of house, right? So yeah, you produce the output. That output is going to be received by decision makers in the movement, and then decisions are taken. But about the code, about the processes, all of that, it's outside. So each time that we have a new consultancy, that have to be done again. So part of what we are doing now at the Red Cross, it's a repository of data science projects from what are doing the local branches of Red Cross. So Swiss Red Cross, French Red Cross, Colombian Red Cross, Mexican. So because technology has been developed, right? And we are kind of in face of similar problems. So we have the same problems around funding, right? We have some donors and they want to fund certain type of projects, so that's a clear recommender system that could be proposed. We have damage assessment. We need to do damage assessment, and then solutions, so damage assessment from satellite imagery. That's one type of solution that we will need. So these type of things are kind of projects that we have now. So to go documenting that, to have kind of a list where we can see each other works and see how a specific need was tackled by other national society. So a local branch of Red Cross. So it's very interesting, and also we are trying to fostering a communication between those local branches, right? So, okay, I am tackling this problem of needs assessments in this way. How are you doing it? So yeah, just wanted to complement that one part is this collaboration between private and these organizations, humanitarian organizations, but also it's how these humanitarian organizations are trying to have their solutions, taking into account that they are so resources constrained and time constrained for have internal people to develop this type of solutions. So yeah.
Yeah, I think those are really good points. A couple things to add. First is regarding funding, and I think you could spend a whole conference talking about money in the development and the international development and humanitarian community development, of course, being IT development, but also in terms of long-term support for developing world countries. But back to what I was saying is that when you're for the issue of funding, I think we all know that IT and data skill sets are generally in quite high demand, and they're also quite expensive. And it's really hard for humanitarian organizations to compete with the likes of the private sector when you can make 2 or 3 times the money working for a private sector company. So the talent pool that you can choose from is much more limited, and it's hard to draw in good talent, really, and also to keep it is also quite a challenge. One other thing to consider is that lots of humanitarian organizations receive funding based off of particular crises. So something happens in the world and a government or some organization gives them money to respond to that crisis. Well, you could siphon off a little bit of that to work on something IT or data related, but this crisis is only for a year or 6 months or whatever. And as we know, it takes a long time to start a data project and then to mature it over time. You really need long-term funding source. And so when organizations have these sort of little chunks of money, it makes it really hard to do this work because it's like you can do something cool in 6 months, well then the consultancy's over. It might be another year until you can start it again, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's really important that this probably goes back to the idea of being data-driven, which is that the funding needs to be there as like a core resource in a humanitarian organization if you're going to do any kind of novel or more advanced data project.
Sorry, just to complement that, because one part is the funding, so compete with private sector. Another is how the humanitarian sector works, at least from my perspective, that there is a lot of, this was a great, no, not a good example, but was a great experience because we have a really very well-defined problem, right? And we know more or less how to find the solution. It was, we can kind of preview and plan around it. But most of the cases, at least from my experience, it's very difficult to take a decision, right? Okay, how are we going to define this? Who has to be in agreement to really move forward? And that really takes a lot of energy. And finally, as you said, if you intersect that with not funding availability for long term, then you have like few outputs in the short term. So yeah, that's just that's what I wanted to compliment.
Well, thank you. Shall we ask our audience if you have any ideas to share with us? Would you like to share something, Andrea?
Just as a contextualization, what we presented now was the first phase of this partnership between Data Friendly Space, that is data-driven company, and IOM that have this specific request on the tool. Now we're moving to the second phase. And in that second phase, we want to improve the tool. As you saw the recall, I mean, the number, like we are just retrieving at 30% of the relevant results in the top, right? There is still like a 70% down there that they have to explore and find. So we have like this technology to, still challenges that we want to improve. And there is also the coverage. Right now, we are just focusing in 4 languages, but we would like to have the external, like more coverage, because this is more, the local media will be in local languages, so that will be a nice way to expand also. So we would like to hear if you have like some ideas. We have already received some nice ideas on, for example, telephone data or metadata. But yeah, like general ideas if you have, but also if you are interested in collaborate or to know more about the project and how to engage in the second phase, that would be nice.
Anyone? Any idea? No idea. Okay.
So you mentioned at some point was the classification problem. I didn't really understand, so maybe you have me, but also some did you abandon the idea of classifying, or was it just first tuning the engine to get not only crappy data and then classify it?
It was kind of a suggestion from our mentor, who told us like it's better if you don't have it as like the title or content, that will be your feature space, and then you predict relevant or not relevant. It will be better, and it makes sense because as you have heard, the way that they work is with the keywords, right? So he said, okay, if you have the content or title, then you have the query that are all the terms that they use, and then you have this relevancy that is not going to be a continuous, but what will be just binomial 0, 1, and that was the approach. But yeah, I guess that another approach could have been taken, but we took that one was mostly because that was the way of working with keywords, and that was the suggestion that we received. We have missing migrant projects. Their objective is to collect this data on how many incidents there are in different routes, and they are collecting this data from news articles and also from different offices in the field that tell them, hey, this incident happened, so that they can put it in a database. So this database is open to the public. We can get it, and we are working with the owners of that data. So that's how we get this relevant data set. Then to have the relevant we did it kind of bringing data from GDELT and making them also verify that this was really not relevant data. So that was how we got our data.
Okay, so from the newspaper, you go around and get all the newspaper online? How do you get it from the newspaper?
So there's this service called GDELT, and it's basically a web crawler for news sources. And it scours the whole web, and then it indexes content based on specific criteria like location, and it has all these other metadata tags that it pulls out. And so there's an API service that it has, and you can connect to it and say what filters you're looking for, and then it returns you all the data like the URL, the extracted text, and the metadata. And then from there, that's what goes into the tool to scan for what's relevant or not relevant for the project.
Most of this information would be, in some cases, in local newspapers that are not available on such platforms, right?
That was the kind of approximation that we saw, that there is like a 60% that is covered. I mean, from the ground truth, right now our ground truth is what they have, right? And then from that ground truth, 60% around is covered by GDELT. Like, I think 20% was really like the news article, we could find it. The other 40%, it's the sources are there, but just the news article we will not find. So we could not find them. So that's why we say, okay, like a 60% is there and the 40% is not there in GDELT. But when we analyze, okay, who are you? Who is this 40%? There was a lot of social media, which is fine because they have other tools to tackle this social media. There were some news sources that were not in GDELT and that should be. So for those sources is that we are imagining that we can suggest to GDELT. I mean, they are open to that, to include new sources. So that's kind of one of the steps that we would like to do in the second phase, right? We have these experts in regions that they know which are these authoritative sources, so that we can kind of send an email to the guys of GDELT and say, hey, can you please add those ones and index them? So yeah, that's kind of...
So you have access to the text, right?
We make the task of extracting the title and content from the URL.
And do you use this text for your relevance metric?
Yeah, so at the beginning, there is the first was the filtering step, right? This is just with the metadata, with the tags. So that's the first step. And then the second step is really looking into the title and the content. So we have this set of keywords that are given from them, and we try to sort it according to this similarity metric, and the title and the text from the title. Yeah.
You could just use a more generic similarity between documents, could you?
Yeah. So it's because we're using the corpus, like the extraction of the text that can be title or content or both, and then the query is that this specific that they have been that they have built through the years. But I think maybe another approach could be feasible because we still have the ground truth data to measure what is that new approach versus this. So yeah, that could be one of the second phase.
Yeah, like doing picture extraction with some kind of machine learning method. You could use non-networks, but you're definitely not, you don't have to. But you could do it on the ground truth and on your documents and build another similarity metric. And you could just do ensemble methods, adding this different similarity metrics to have something more sophisticated, not only on one particular way of measuring similarity.
Nice. Yeah, that will be great. You are welcome to the team.
I'm sorry, I already have that.
It's open source though.
But yeah, we really developed the baseline. So it was just the similarity. We searched other similarity metrics, but that was the one that performed the best. But we do understand that we can take some more, word embeddings that are like text embeddings that are smarter, so that we can probably get better performance.
My point was even those that are not working could be used to boost, like a boosting method. Like usually we use classifiers that are not that good, but combining them works much better. So you could do that also with similarity.
Nice. Okay, yeah, that we didn't try. Yeah, just we compared like 3 different, but we didn't do similarity, like ensemble of similarity metrics. Yeah.
Well, anyone else? Any thoughts, ideas?
So yeah, I have one thought to share. So like usually GDUCT is obviously a huge data set, right? And so we're talking about putting it everything into our own servers and then like computing it. So that's a lot of compute. You need a lot of resource, right? And so usually these fundings for smaller projects, they only last for a few months. So like where do we draw the line, at least according to you, where do we draw the line on what to push the organization for? So like we need this much resource for computing everything, and we can come up with really good results, as opposed to like we'll only be doing this much with the limited funding. So like what are your thoughts on that?
Do you mean where we would discuss with IOM about the cost of hosting?
Yeah. No, not only that, but like I think every even the methods that you propose revolves around the funding that you have, right? And obviously there's so much more that you can do, but like how do we like explain to the legacy organizations that like there's so much more?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think there's a couple aspects. For me, it comes down to really just clearly explaining these are the options. You know, option A, it's going to cost you this much, and we can do this, and then B, C, D, whatnot. And just presenting it to them and saying, hey, how well do you want your models and your system to perform? And, you know, we're happy to do any one of these. And then it's kind of up to them in terms of what they want to do. Now, sometimes as an organization, because we're also a nonprofit, we'll do work beyond the scope of what we're getting paid for simply because we want it to perform better. But of course, we have limitations with that one as well. Our interest is, of course, at the end of the day, is to make things that work as well as possible. And I think talking to people that either aren't super technical or are slightly technophobic, it can be a bit of a challenge to explain why we need to, first of all, use something like AWS, which may not be the preferred environment, and then why we have to use all these serverless technologies, and we can't just have one monolithic server to do all this. So it's, you know, I think what's really interesting about the job is to be able to translate technical things to non-technical people. But it's a good question.
I add to that?
You want to come here?
Thanks. I think that's a really great question because so seeing it from the other side, you can give me 3 different options with 3 different tag prices, but price tags, but I'm really not going to understand them. You know, like I think we would appreciate to know the difference in the result, no? And yeah, so I guess the communication should be focused on knowing what I'm gonna get for each price, not what you're gonna do, but what I'm gonna get back. And then, of course, then there will be a compromise from our side because, yeah, you know, funding is limited always. But it's also good to know that if we had more money, maybe we could do something amazing, you know? It's also interesting, is it a matter of having enough resources, or is it a matter of, I mean, I guess that, you know, you could always just add a lot more resources and then of course do something better. But, you know, is this something that it's technically possible, it would just cost a lot of money, or is this something, you know, is there a real technical solution that could help us have a way better estimation of the number of migrant deaths, or not? Or is this just, no, it's just not technically possible. So yeah, I would say like focus on the result when you communicate it to whomever you're working with.
And maybe to add on that, I think it's very difficult for both sides, because trying to communicate uncertainty for like from the tech side, it's very difficult to the policy side, right? So people that do any of the humanitarian work, any of the programs, they want to know what is actually possible. And when you're talking about this, you really don't know when you start what is going to be like your result, right? So it's like when I said that we are giving a little bit more opportunity to that, and I think this project that is now, getting like the second phase, it's basically saying, hey, okay, like a very little thing helped us, this much. Maybe we extend it a little bit. If we invest a little bit more in this, we can get better results. So maybe that's a good approach. Yet it's probably not the perfect approach, but I think like now when organizations try to get themselves a little bit more into what data really can make for them and try to be a little bit more open to new ideas, I think things are gonna start changing, but it's still yet difficult to try to communicate uncertainty. And I think this is something that is very important in terms of the work that has been done by a lot of technical people that are working now within the humanitarian sector.
Just one thing. Oh, sorry, maybe you want to say something about the position. It just occurred to me, but probably you are already doing this. We were speaking before, and you said one of your main challenges is that you don't have a complete data set from which you can retrieve information you need. And I was thinking whether it would be an interesting thing to do also, considering what you said about the private sector and like to partner up with universities and to turn some of your needs into small projects that can be done by supervised students. Of course, I mean, it's not all, but maybe it could help because it's also a way of motivating people to contribute to this kind of projects.
We'll have a sign-up sheet at the end. Thank you.
Does anyone know? You have a question?
One question on the previous. You said you're also covering social media for getting for these clues. Are you also using Reddit for this?
Ready.
Nope, not at all.
I think that would be really impactful.
How?
I've got a lot of
Tell me.
history looking at Reddit, so you can choose me for that.
Because Reddit ecosystem, I think people are really helpful in, for example, validating data, also providing data, information, and it's a really huge community that can just form on a topic.
Ah, so you mean tapping into the community?
Yes. And also, just bringing this issue up here, there's a large number of users just waiting there to sort of, I don't know, even help you annotate the data, or not annotate, but like, I don't know, bring some quality to it with masses. So and then also it has some APIs you can integrate.
Wow.
I mean, that's really interesting, and I think it also talks about, it refers to what Ewan was talking about earlier, how there is this disconnect between humanitarian organizations or, such as a UN agency and, an organization like Data Friendly Space, like a purely tech company or organization, because there's the UN is very inflexible. I would find it extremely hard, honestly, like extremely difficult that the UN is going to want to, for example, relay. I mean, students. I think it's a one thing because you can make an agreement with their university, or you know, if we're gonna work with Meta, we can do a contract with them. But you know, who represents Reddit? There's no one that we can go to and be like, okay, we sign an agreement that you're gonna do this for us, we're gonna do this for you, this is the terms, you know? So maybe there's a lot of these resources and people out there that would be willing and able to you know, bring value to the project. I just find it hard to see how we could justify that to the UN, you know. So, yeah, you know, more flexibility from our part. I think it's extremely needed.
One way you could look at it is not something you can include in your data set, but it could be the indication of where is, for example, the migration happening. So, because Reddit communities are really spread across, so they can give you the first indication of where you should look.
That's a good idea.
You can do the experts much more connected and sort of filtered way of looking at, okay, we should look for newspapers in this section, or sort of contact the local people there, trusted reporters,
Yeah.
so they can find, like, pinpoint. I think this is something they're doing right now, for example, in Ukraine case, also in other migration groups, they're actually pointing to where the resources should be allocated. And these are individual people that just flag something like, yeah, this is important, I see it, and then the news also picks it up. So in most cases, like, the news that comes out of the mainstream is also filtered through these communities, saying this is an important topic that should be looked at. Then it can scale up because a lot of other people are also paying attention to this. So you sort of have a pre-filter to where you should look, right? Because you have already quite limited resources
Yeah.
to allocate.
Yeah.
If you can direct that in a meaningful way, then Reddit would be the first tuning in to sort of get the direction.
Yeah. No, thank you. I think this is really interesting because it's, you know, like already someone else mentioned volunteers, etc. So yeah, I'll definitely, you know, take note and try to bring it out to my team.
Does anyone know when is the happy hour? We can continue the conversation there, because we have to leave the room now.
Oh.
Thank you everyone for being here with us. It was a very interesting session, interesting questions, like really good interaction. Thank you everyone.